Hello, everyone. It's time to shake things up because we're starting season 19 of the Productized Podcast. My name is João Bernardino, and I'll be your host for today's episode. This season, we're all about create change together with Productized 2025, where we explore how product leaders, innovators, and changemakers can drive real, lasting impact across teams, industries, and communities. Today's guest, Claudia, in front of you, is someone who is creating change in mobility. Her mission is to create better mobility for everyone. Claudia Falkinger is the founder of Point Hand, a mobility innovation studio, and the driving force behind the Better Mobility Accelerator, which is a pan-European program dedicated to fostering inclusive and sustainable mobility solutions. With a rich background in innovation, communication, and mobility, Claudia has curated and facilitated over 200 interactive events, including TEDx Vienna and South by Southwest sessions. Hello, Claudia. How are
Hey,
you?
everybody. Good. Happy to be here today.
It's so good to do this with you. People don't know yet, but we actually work together on the Better Mobility Accelerator. We'll tell you about it later, but this will be fun actually, because normally we regularly meet because we have to organize tasks and discuss our vision, our approach for the program. But today we're going, just to talk a bit. Yeah. And you have a great background, a great story, and I'm sure this will be exciting to our listeners. And so maybe I'll start not with actual work, but with you. You work in mobility, just like me as well. Both of us have worked in the mobility field for a long time. And I wanted to ask you what mobility is for you. And let me just refer to something that comes from academia, the Marketing constant. I don't know if you heard about it, but apparently human beings have been traveling more or less the same amount of time per day since we are humans. So think of the Paleolithic age, think of all the history, the technological and social changes. And on average, apparently, we move more or less 1 hour. There are many variations, but on average for human beings, 1 hour per day. And this makes me reflect what really is mobility for us. So what is mobility for you, Claudia?
Just recently, I heard that mobility or moving around independently is the first thing you want to do as a child and the last thing you want to do when you're older, to still move around independently without help. And I think this kind of reflects our human being. Like we see mobility as granted, as normal, but actually it is essential. It doesn't matter if we want to go to school, to work, to travel, or just to hang around and visit friends. So it's an essential part of everyday life now, back then, and also in the future. And so I see myself kind of as an adventurer, not only moving around, but mobility also has this kind of transformation and innovation in it because it's about moving forward and not stopping. Maybe sometimes you walk a bit slower, sometimes faster, but this is kind of why I love this field so much about mobility and transportation because it's so essential, no matter if it's on economical topics, ecologically, a huge part also when it comes to sustainability, but also on a social level, how to take part in public and everyday life.
Yeah, and how did this happen? You working in mobility? Tell me a bit about the story.
I never planned working in mobility, so it was not on my bucket list or whatever. So my background is more in communication, market research, marketing, and so on. And I always worked in technological fields, back then more in finance. And just at a startup event, I met a person and then I kind of stumbled into the world of mobility. Um, around 10 years ago into a huge transportation corporation with millions of passengers each and every year, and built up an innovation department there that always was eager, not only starting my own communities like women in mobility and so on, but then around actually at the beginning of COVID in one of the lockdowns, we started our company again. Now we're working internationally, and having these different hats or backgrounds doesn't matter if it's working at a corporation. I'm also a university lecturer, but I'm also an entrepreneur myself. It's also part of my own personal or professional journey.
So you got passionate, surprisingly passionate about the topic, and you just kept on going from project to project, I guess. But let's go back to your life. How do you move normally?
Well, I live in Vienna, Austria, so it's one of the most livable and accessible cities worldwide. People are sometimes really surprised that I have never owned a car in my mid-30s, but I kind of never did. I have a driving license, but I love to move around whatever I need. Doesn't matter if it's the train. Now, I often take my bike. Other times, I take a plane. Wherever I have to be or however the weather is, I choose flexible and independently what fits best. So I feel very lucky that I can do this, and this is also where, like, how we want to order something online, we want to do it now and we want to have it now. And this is also in fields such as mobility. You choose what you want to do in this situation.
Yeah. How would it be like for you? You're in the morning and you're thinking, should I go by train? Should I go by bike? What drives your decisions?
Well, first of all, the weather. Second, what meetings I have. Do I need to carry around a lot? Then I might not take the bike, but the subway in Vienna. So I think there are a lot of influences each and every day. When we talk about corporate mobility, how we move to work, a lot of times it's very clear and it's a habit. And mobility also needs a lot of transformation because we don't mainly think about it. I'm very curious, so I also love to try out new things. But to really make a change on a bigger level and reach various target groups in a city, in countries, and so on, we really need to understand their different movement patterns. What I do might not be the right way for others because they have kids or they have some kind of disability or whatever, or they live in an area where there are not many options. So this what makes mobility and transportation very complex, but also very interesting.
Yeah, I am engineer, and in my studies, mobility is mostly something you need to do. You consider how much time you take, but then it's so much more. Very often, commuting for me is a great part of the day. Is a day I am with myself. I can listen to a podcast like this one, and there's nothing else interrupting. And if the experience of mobility is a good experience, it can really be an add-on to your life. Yeah. And it has so many perspectives.
Absolutely. It's kind of a lifestyle, right? And I remember
Also,
a lot of meetings that we had, and you were on a bike or just stopping at the seaside or whatever. So you really incorporate this.
you can also be productive while traveling. Yeah, in a fun way. Why? Let's record someday a podcast on while traveling. We can try
that
that.
will be fun.
Okay. But you were already starting about talking on the experience of different types of people, but still centering on you.
I would say
Inspired, educational,
overwhelming, very practical,
challenging,
thought-provoking,
meaningful,
enthusiastic,
nice people,
innovation, and fun.
Product growth mindset.
new connections.
Join us at the coolest product management environment this October in Lisbon.
You are a woman. You created this initiative of women in mobility. First of all, where did that come from? Was this from your experience in mobility, your personal experience? How did you enter this field?
With women in mobility or?
Yeah. Yeah, your interest in the topic.
In the topic, well, from my own experience, as I said, I worked in a huge corporation with thousands of people.
That's OBB, right?
Yes, this
The
is the
train
Austrian
operator of Austria.
Federal Railways, who runs railways, but also does car sharing to apps and so on and so forth. So also like a huge mobility provider. But well, first of all, I mentioned sometimes I feel pretty alone as a woman in meetings, in leadership trainings, wherever. And we also knew, hey, not only we as workers might have different approaches or needs, but mainly also from a user perspective that those movement patterns are not really seen.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why we started Women in Mobility, which is a European-wide network, mainly German-speaking, or we are most active there with some thousands of women already being part. And then, and this is also how our company kind of was a spin-off, let's call it like this, that, for example, more and more companies like car sharing companies to cargo bikes approached us saying, hey, we have just launched a new product or app or whatever, but why is it that only 20% of women are using our product? We thought we develop it for everybody. So we start asking questions like, hey, how is your team set up? Because we know we plan for what we know, which is human. We plan for situations that are just familiar to us. And yeah, this was the first question. The second is, how do you actually involve different movement patterns in your product development? So from testing to surveys to marketing, whatever it is, but especially when it comes to product development. So currently mobility systems are developed for a very specific demographical group, mainly people in their let's say 20s to 45-ish, speaking the local language, having A to B ways, no care work responsibilities such for kids or elderlies and so on and so forth. But this is not the market reality. This is not only about women, this is about families, this is about an aging society and so on. So actually currently we are developing mobility for a niche. And this is not only in this field, but we could also talk about medicine and so on and so forth. And I don't want to blame anybody here. As I said, this is human, but we have to expand our knowledge about target groups because we have to really put our focus there, especially to the target groups that we don't reach yet or don't know yet. And this is core of our work that we're doing and using this as competitive advantage to reach new target groups, make more money, create better services, raise acceptance of new mobility solutions, and create new business models out of it.
Yeah, I'd say that when you think of especially urban mobility, the existing mobility options pretty much depend on, let's say, public policy. It's just the way it is. It's the market. There is a lot of space scarcity. You need public investment. And yeah, decision makers tend to be a certain type of person who feels their needs in a certain way. And you tend to plan for what you know, right? So that's one part of it, I'd say. The other part is that it's just easier to deliver solutions to the easier cases, like people like us, for example. And so, yes, that's where the concern for mobility for all comes in, right? And the Better Mobility Accelerator comes from there. So maybe you want to start sharing what the Better Mobility Accelerator is.
Absolutely. So 3 years ago, we started this European-wide innovation program with heads in Vienna and in Lisbon. So we have like a really great, we have outstanding locations for it to promote innovations in the field of mobility that are accessible, affordable, safe, and sustainable. Didn't want to be like just another accelerator. We have been part of accelerators ourselves. We are founders, so we really know this is not just about spending money or whatever, or some time that we could actually use for something else. So really making the most out of it and thinking it on a bigger scale. So sure, we started with a 6-month program, scouting innovations all over Europe, picking the best 12 ones each and every year. We thought we will put the focus on 3 main areas. First, giving access to living labs. So really getting out there to enter a market or to expand. And this is best done by really getting there to test it in cities, in real life to validate your product and get forward. The second one is getting access to target groups, like new ones that you might not reach, but also to experts that can give you the knowledge that you might not have, or access to new customers and so on. And third, it's also about increasing impact and investment readiness. So we are not investing yet, but it's really about what are public but also private investment options to also scale or improve your service, whatever your goal is as a founder. And this is what started 3 years ago. Now we are the biggest community in Europe with a huge database, with asset mentor pool, with great partners and so on. And just some weeks ago, we published a new trend report, which was also downloaded more than 1,000 times already. So we're really building up more we're capacity building in that field, and have even more plans on what we can reach with this ecosystem to really reach various target groups, but also as a goal, 450 million of Europeans, because we want to strengthen the European market and building livable cities and regions.
Yeah, so that's a wrap on the Better Mobility Accelerator, and even already what you're thinking ahead. But let's go to each part of it. First of
Yeah.
all, you mentioned already some target groups, like people who specific needs they have to give care to someone. Maybe they are elderly. Maybe they live in a remote area without mobility options, and maybe they are disabled. And well, we can think a lot of cases. Give me a few examples of the startups that we've been having on the Better Mobility Accelerator. What solutions are they bringing?
Yeah. Well, maybe first an example that to understand more what is actually better mobility and what it can mean, as I mentioned, for example, with sharing services. Imagine you're around with a kid which doesn't have a smartphone, or at least no credit card. So to unlock a bike or a scooter, you need an account. But when a kid is already, let's say, kind of active, that they can do it on their own, being independent, but you're moving around with them, you can just unlock one scooter with your device. So by only changing this, that with one account, you can unlock, let's say, 2 or 3 scooters that you can move around with your kid. This already increased numbers of customers. So I'm just giving examples, or for example, decreasing the size of a handle, that it's also because sometimes it's just too big to grab a handle of a bike or a scooter. But let's dive into other examples when it comes to ventures and startups that we are all working with all over Europe. So one of my favorite examples is from London, called Lendocare. As we have heard, we're living in an aging society, which is great that we live longer. And this is a really demographical trend that we know that the numbers are rising. This is a huge target group. But currently in mobility, it's not really, there is no proactive change or services developed, but just like, yes, it's difficult for elderlies and so on. But Lendocare knew people, when they are older, they still want to travel. Actually, the number is pretty high. Almost half of people over 64 are traveling regularly. This is a huge number. So they invented kind of a wheelchair as a service tool. So imagine you are on a booking tool. Doesn't matter if it's a hotel or whatever favorite booking tool you have to book your holidays. And when you check out, you normally have this, do you want an insurance or whatever? And they can manage that, for example, a wheelchair or whatever assistive service is already waiting in your hotel room for you. So you have it practically there. It's also affordable. You don't have to buy it. You can rent it. In the future, you might also can pick it up on the airport or on train stations and so on. And you can also expand this service to, let's say, child seats and so on and so forth. So it really enables an aging society to move around independently, that it's affordable, and they have the equipment they need wherever they are. And they have such a huge demand on their services that they are scaling big. And this is also a really great success story, what new services can
Yeah.
get out of
There's this
demographical things.
mega trend called Forever Young, which is the wish of the elderly to keep doing things as if they were young and appreciate them, which didn't happen in the past. People had different, but it's happening more and more. And yes, Lendo Care kind of delivers that.
Yeah.
I live in Lisbon. In Lisbon, sometimes people who come from abroad mention that it's hard to find people on a wheelchair. You don't see them very often. And the reason is really about accessibility. Lisbon is a very old, but also hilly and has a lot of challenges. But I'm very often close to downtown, and I see more and more elderly, more and more people who are still moving around despite they're using some support for that.
Absolutely. I would like to stress out that when we talk about accessible or inclusive mobility, this is not only like the wheelchair that we see on icons and so on. So just imagine all of those who are listening. So who has ever traveled with luggage or with a kid or has some kind of disability, can be physically, can be mentally, can also be temporarily, just when you broke your leg, for example, who is sometimes picking up a box from the postal office or some self-service boxes. So all of this means inclusive mobility, that it's very comfortable. Doesn't matter if it's physically or also digitally. And as you might know, by mid of this year, the EU Accessibility Act takes place, that especially digital products need to be accessible. And I think, yeah, come on, another regulatory whatever. But as I know, you're also talking a lot about AI in the Productized podcast and your work. This is also helpful for, let's say, search engine optimization, artificial intelligence, that your services are found. So accessible code, for example, is also helping you perform even better. So also seeing the benefits that maybe others are not using and you can use it as your competitive advantage. I think these are really the forerunners that really make a change.
Yeah, but I think our listeners, maybe they would like a few more examples.
Sure.
I was thinking, you were mentioning the example of the kid who wants to get a shared bike. I was thinking, well, maybe don't do it. Well, it's not maybe. In some cases, it's for real because of safety reasons. So safety is a big topic, for example.
Absolutely.
And thinking of bikes, we've been having several startups on bike, and particularly bike safety. And if you think of kids and mothers, we had, for example, a startup that is working on this airbag for children who are on the bike seats behind, and another one who enables you to decrease your saddle as you move. And this is an issue, for example, let's say for mothers who are carrying their two children, they have to stop on a traffic light and they feel unsafe. They feel they could fall. And so this ability to lower the saddle at that moment enables them to, feel less unsafe. I was just I never made this relation, but when you were giving this example, it's really a chain of barriers that are connected sometimes. And we have startups solving different issues, but you were thinking of something.
Yeah, as you said, really great services for mothers and fathers and their kids, but also not only on consumer side, but also on an infrastructure side. For example, for cities who want to plan accessible, safe bike lanes, for example. So we've also worked with various cities or a startup called Lane Patrol, who is really developing or help to plan safe bike roads. So where should you really improve your infrastructure, collecting the data and showcasing those areas to effectively and efficiently plan for your city and region. And thanks to our accelerator, just recently they published a new partnership with another city here in Austria. So it's always great seeing what comes out of it and which new contacts are being built and projects finding their way to life and even more cities and regions, and especially happy customers and bikers.
You're talking about several different stakeholders, and I feel this
Yes.
is an important part. And it's actually something that you do in an impressive way. You're building an ecosystem of actors because in mobility you cannot usually innovate alone. Tell me about how you're creating this ecosystem and what parts are essential in it, how to bring them together.
Yes, said mobility is a very complex field, no matter where you are, and thus it's so important bringing various perspectives together, no matter if it's the public sector, is it the industry, is it innovators, no matter if it's startups or from university and researchers, as well as the consumers and customers themselves, the people living in an area, which in the end using it, and a lot of times they're overseen. So most importantly, we have to bring them to the table when it comes to product development, when it's about decisions and so on. But well, really building this ecosystem is, and as we call it, community management and engagement is really relevant to talk on an eye level, to share the different perspectives, the opportunities for each player, but also maybe the things that could be difficult, and finding solutions, finding funding, finding people supporting a livable field, cities and so on. So I think this is really, it's a lot of work doing such stakeholder management, but it's also one of the key elements to create successful mobility solutions and products.
To make it more visual, as an attendee myself, I was in Vienna already 2 times, and I was present in these events that you create between the startups and multiple stakeholders. You make them comfortable, and you make them share challenges, and you ask them specifically to be supportive to each other, to bring ideas for solutions. So it's these kind of interactions that are being created. And as an outsider to what you've been doing in Vienna, it's really inspiring to see. And like you said, the community is really getting big, the Better Mobility community. And like you said from the beginning, it's more than an accelerator. It's more than an accelerator, is an ecosystem that is being built. It's a lot of opportunities. Maybe you can take us through a little bit of your vision for the future. Where will we go from here?
First of all, thank you very much. Also had a great experience in Lisbon and how you were setting up. So compliments also back to you. Well, overall, I think we have to move towards the direction that accessible mobility is not a social project. It's market reality. And currently mobility providers are missing millions of people. So this is why, first of all, we will strengthen our community, quality for quantity, and really finding the most driving forces to make true difference, to bring best or better practices to life. So community first. Second, for the accelerator, we plan special cross-industry tracks. So, for example, we see high potential in the field of tourism, because tourism wouldn't be anything without mobility. So it would be kind of dead. You couldn't travel there. You couldn't travel back or on-site or the experience itself. So mobility is such an important field in mobility or for mobility, and also creating new experiences. So this field, creating own tracks on mobility and tourism and around health and around active mobility. So if somebody is listening and think, oh my God, that would be interesting, let's have a chat, contact one of us and happy to talk about that. Third, we just published a new trend report, and more companies, investors, funding agencies, and approaching us to really showcase the high potential areas that we spotted. So when we publish reports, this shouldn't be another 20 PowerPoint slides or paper that is flying around and nobody's looking at it. We want to bring those knowledge to life, to make it applicable no matter if you're working in IT, product management, leadership, you name it. So this is really great. Yes.
Let's go inside the company, a
Yeah, sure.
company that is working on mobility. It could be OBB, where you worked and where you were developing an innovation department. From the inside of a person there that wants to innovate, what do you have to say? What is the experience like, and what can you get from this?
Well, in current economical situation, I think companies, doesn't matter if it's in public or in private, see it as an opportunity that with one product you can reach even more target groups, like paying customers, with just simple changes. Imagine just raising or doubling the amount of families using your services, or elderlies with just a one or other twist in your product. But also you need to be on the forefront and knowing what is coming, what are the new technologies or societal demographical changes, and what does it mean for my market. There are so many unused potential and opportunities out there, which is also especially important when it comes to business development. So I think if you're not looking at that field, you're missing a big bucket of the market that others might grab. And so really for your product development, but also improving the quality and the acceptance of new mobility solutions. Because we always say, for example, on-demand shuttles or whatever new mobility solution that you're developing is worth nothing, even if it's the best technology, when nobody is using it, or just a fraction of the market. So you really have to get customers on board, different stakeholders, to really increase also the visibility, acceptance, and spreading or growth of your product. So I think, or at least this is what we hear from our partners, that this is one of the biggest benefits when working with us, really spotting those black boxes that they don't have on their radar, and finally reach.
And probably you contacted with people who are in one of these organizations, and they already have clear ideas on, maybe they have already clear ideas on what should be done, or they have ideas at least, but they don't know how to implement them or face, let's say, barriers. It's always difficult. The innovation is a process, and when you are in a big organization, you have several types of barriers. From this perspective, where do you see the role of startups or a program like Better Mobility?
Well, I think we really bring those practices to the table that you might not have on the radar, or especially public providers are simply missing. So at the end, they would be too slow developing such things. So I think really using that innovation boost, working together with startups, partnering with them, offering services together, investing in them, whatever stage you are, and really seeing how can I expand my product portfolio or improve it, expand it, and so on. I think they are, at least what our databases and findings show, also from the trend report, they are definitely the forerunners in that field, and a lot of corporations, and especially also in the field of public services, are missing this opportunity to creating livable areas, because where do young families decide to live or to move to, or where do I want to spend my retirement? This is where you have great surroundings, great services, and also being using it, for example, at tourism regions. This can also be used as a really great marketing campaign saying, hey, we are one of the, let's say, most family-friendly regions or whatever, and then showcasing such solutions, innovation solutions from, for example, the startups that they implement. So I think it really depends what are your biggest challenges, but also the greatest opportunities you see. And this might be totally different for each and everybody. Yes, to be really future ready, you need to take a look at this because these are also the demographical data that we know and have. And it is more than plannable than other things. And this is why you really should take a closer look to that.
All right. I'm also thinking that something related to the program that's worth covering. The program is made possible by EIT Urban Mobility, which is a European institution dedicating itself to innovation in the mobility field. And it's a relatively new organization that kind of has a different approach to the traditional funding mechanisms of European Commission and European Union. How do you see these? How do you see their approach and these kind of programs that they have been promoting?
So, well, they have a really big portfolio. Doesn't matter if it's supporting startups, working with cities all over Europe, same with universities and so on, and investing as well in ventures. So it's a really great opportunity or big, like a toolkit that you can use. And I think we're very lucky having also such partners on eye level, developing such programs together. In some areas, we have very strong relations, but for example, if I would need a connection to another city, let's say in Italy or whatever, I know I can reach out to those partner managers and say, hey, who is in there? Or just recently, we had a community meeting in Munich where from all over Europe, people from industry to cities and startups came together. And I think this is what makes it special. Sure, it's also always a continuous development in there. So it's also interesting to observe this or be part of it. But overall, it's also strengthening a European approach.
Yeah, for me, the appearance of EIT Urban Mobility is really a kick in innovation in Europe,
Absolutely.
in mobility innovation. I was used to, Horizon Europe projects. They're great, but they are like 3-year projects where you correspond to some challenge and then that's it. And there's another project and there's all these community of, let's say, consultants that specialize in this kind of products. But I felt, having worked on it, that's very often things were happening for the project, not for the innovation itself or for building something that would really change society. And EIT Urban Mobility, coming from the public sector, I think it's a positively surprising approach because they're also an investor. They are trying to behave as a typical startup investor. They connect the startups to cities, to stakeholders. So personally, I feel excited to be on a journey that is also, very, very, very relevant case of innovation and a partnership between the public sector, in this case, European, with entrepreneurs, all the way to entrepreneurs. Yeah, so that's a great positive side of Better Mobility Accelerator as well to me. Well, we're wrapping up. I wanted to ask you first, do you have a big message or something that you didn't say? Maybe what's left to be said is if you are some player, some individual, a company out there, whatever, a city that really wants to connect to better mobility, what should they do?
Well, great question. A big question. I think challenge your own beliefs and think about or maybe when you drive to work or whatever, try to see to the right and to the left and see what might be when you compare yourself, for example, what might be the differences that those people are moving differently, or how can I understand those movement patterns better, but also think where are the gaps that we are not using yet. So it's kind of a scavenger hunt, moving around in your day-to-day, and you see where can we still make an improvement, or where is an innovation opportunity to improve products in bigger or smaller steps. And if you want to join the Better Mobility community in whatever way, is it digitally, is it in Lisbon, in Vienna, or beyond, I think we're very open to this and also exploring new ways. We also have our own blind spots, so maybe you spot them and then we can move forward in this regard and shape better mobility together.
Yeah. We began with the motto of Productized 2025, which is create change together. Does this remind you of something?
It really fits to those words in shaping it together, that we
It's
need
actually
those.
very close to your LinkedIn motto that you
Really?
have there, which is creating better mobility for everybody, create change together. Yeah.
That's right. Well spotted. What a
Okay.
match.
Well, Claudia, it's been a big pleasure. Thank you so much. So that's a wrap for today's episode of the Productized Podcast. Thank you again, Claudia. For everyone tuning in, don't forget to follow Productize on LinkedIn, subscribe to the podcast, and leave us a comment with your thoughts on today's episode. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks again for listening. Remember, change is something we can all create together. See you in the next episode.